Welcome to The Roll Forward, a podcast for the next wave of finance leaders, especially those looking to transform their roles by making smarter, faster, and more profitable business decisions using the power of technology and a forward-looking approach to finance. Listen in to learn how to get out of the back office trenches and become a more strategic partner within your organization.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Roll Forward podcast. My name is Joe Michalowski, and this episode is brought to you by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. And today we've got a bit of a different episode. We talked to a lot of external finance leaders, and today we're talking to someone from Mosaic. We're chatting with Steve Groccia, the head of customer success here, but he's a former head of finance himself before he made the shift to CS. So Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Excited.
Yeah, this is going to be great. Steve, I've gotten the privilege of chatting with Steve about finance topics in the past. I'm really excited about this episode. But before we kind of dive into our main topic, do you want to just give a little background on yourself? What were you doing before Mosaic? How you made the shift to CS?
For sure. Yeah. So started my career in audit at Deloitte & Touche in Connecticut. Started the accounting route from college. And spent a few years in audit doing banking, financial services type clients. My wife and I kind of got the itch to get out of the Northeast, and so we moved to San Francisco, where I joined the M&A practice. Worked a lot with SaaS companies. Worked a lot with private equity firms to buying and selling companies, really on the financial diligence side. Learned a ton there, and then being in San Francisco, I think everyone gets the itch to join a startup, and so tried to leverage a lot of my learnings from finance, and was the first in finance at a fintech company called Fundbox. Joined there when they just raised Series B, first in finance, and spent 4.5 years there, really building out the function, seeing the growth, learning a ton about just the business from the inside. And then got approached by the co-founders at Mosaic, and saw it as an interesting opportunity to kind of take what I've learned across my career, both on the professional services side, the trusted advisor, if you will, and then in-house in finance, and leverage kind of both of those together in a customer-facing role to really help solve, a lot of the problems that I faced, and I know my peers face on a day-to-day basis. So it was a unique opportunity, but definitely I've been with Mosaic now for 2 years. Definitely has been an awesome ride. I've learned a ton. But yeah, it's a little bit of a unique route to get to where I am.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's I say it a lot either on this podcast. I say it a lot internally. As a content person, I'm super fortunate to have people like you who come in and in all the roles we have in Mosaic, really just a ton of finance roles that are no longer like sitting in a finance position at this company. And I think it makes everybody better at what we're trying to build. And so, when we're doing this podcast episode, try to come up with a topic that is relevant to whoever's coming on. And so your dual experience in CS and finance makes for a good episode about a really critical topic for everybody, which is retention. And, I've talked about it in the past, but specifically going to try to dig into cohort analysis. Mostly because we did this research report at the beginning of 2022, really about like benchmarking, not just SaaS metrics, but like the process of getting those metrics. And one of the questions we asked was, do you use cohort analysis for things like net revenue retention or gross revenue retention? And it was like 14% of finance leaders responded saying that they use cohort analysis to look at retention, which felt really low to me as somebody just like outside looking in. So I'm curious why, as somebody with this dual experience, why do you think that number is that low? Is that surprising to you or no?
I don't think it's surprising. I mean, I guess if I think about it, what are the challenges? I think sometimes just the fundamentals of having time, right? And having resources to do what I would call like these deeper analyses, right? And I remember my first couple years at my last company, just doing everything, right? You're doing everything from closing the books to payroll to anything that touches a number, you're kind of responsible for, and you're the only one responsible for it, right? And so there's always these big burning fires, and you never really have the time to do this deeper level analysis. And I think I bet if you ask that group how many want to do the cohort, I bet that number is really high, right? But time becomes a challenge, and even just like getting data in a structured format to be able to do it. Like even if you had the time, it takes a lot of time to just set up the data in a way that would actually make it usable and make it work. I mean, we had to leverage like our BI team to build structured data and then get all that data into like a Tableau, BI tool. And then I had to learn the BI tool and then figure out what does the data look like? And then figure out, well, what do I actually want to do? And how do I want to interpret this data? So all that takes time. All that takes a lot of resources and energy, which is a challenge. And then, I'd say for some companies, it may not be beneficial until you get to a certain scale, right? And so especially when you're thinking about cohorting, there's, you think about like the number of customers you have, the number of transactions you have, that's where it becomes super valuable. If you have these, really large contracts, bespoke contracts, things like that, it's really hard to actually bucket customers into segments and actually leverage what the power of cohorting is. At Funbox, we're dealing with in the SMB space, so tons and tons of homogenous customers where we had no choice, but we had to cohort, because if you're trying to get into the weeds of what's this customer doing versus this customer, you're never going to actually find insights.
So, I mean, in a word, cohort analysis, huge pain. I think that's honestly kind of the crux of a lot of what we're doing here with our content with Mosaic, is that finance has a lot of like highly manual tasks that just take a lot of time. And so not surprising to me based on all the conversations we've had is that it just comes down to that time. And I liked what you said about, how many of those 86% that said, do it, how many of them want to be able to do cohort analysis. So really liked that. And I think that kind of leads to my next question is, when cohort analysis is necessary, when isn't it? And so can you just talk a little bit about the difference between like a basic churn analysis, maybe like the sort of basics of looking at your retention versus what you're talking about where you're going deeper with cohort analysis? Is there anything you miss out on by not going the deeper level, or is basic churn analysis fine in many cases?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the basic churn analysis, and I kind of think about it like, you're looking at your churn over time, but you're doing it at a super, super high level, right? So that's usually your starting point. And it's a number that you need to know inside and out from a finance perspective. It's a number I need to know inside and out now at Mosaic from a CS perspective, because it's a number I'm responsible for. And it's obviously a number your investors care about if you're in a SaaS business. That 120% net dollar retention is like that quote unquote magic number. And so that's your starting point, right? And so it's table stakes just to know where do you land, relative to other companies of your size and what have you. But then to really understand the dynamics of it, like that's where the cohorting becomes very powerful, because you could actually start slicing and dicing this data so many different ways to really understand why, right? And I think that becomes very powerful from a finance perspective. And sometimes you need the structure, you need the tools to be able to do it, but understanding the why is really how you could find the insights and really drive business change, which that is the gold standard for anyone in finance, right? Is you do all this work, you want to share it with the rest of the organization, and you want it to drive more revenue, right? You want to become revenue generating in finance if you can. So that's where it'd be helpful.
So what would be, so I hear you on net revenue retention kind of hitting that 120, but if you're talking about the high level, like when we're going a level deeper, like what are some of the most common use cases where you decide like, okay, we're going to go a level deeper, we're going to do cohort analysis? What are the most impactful ways that you can use that to become that revenue generator in the company?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways. I mean, I could probably talk cohorts for hours upon hours. I kind of think about two different flavors of cohorting. Let's call it like segment-based cohorting and time-based cohorting. And so, segment-based, we had one investor when we were going through a debt financing at Funbox that really wanted what they called a layer cake chart, right? And so, okay, that sounds cool. no idea what it means. So we started to look into it, and now I love layer cake charts. And it's essentially, you have your dates across without getting too technical, the dates across your x-axis. Yep. And think about, like, you want to look at your ARR over time, right? And so if business is going well, that ARR over time is going up and to the right really fast. But then actually segmenting that ARR by your different cohorts, and each layer of that ARR stack is a different, let's call it, when customers joined, when you signed on customers, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and onward. And so it looks like a colorful layer cake that you would you would have for dessert. And it's actually it's very insightful on when you dive into it, it's insightful because it tells a lot about how much of your revenue is from existing customers, how old your customers are, right? Which from a SaaS perspective, like, the stickier you can make the product, the better for just the long-term viability of the business. And so you just learn a lot by, like, segmenting your different data by cohorts. And then, it's you're trying to find that balance with, you want a lot of layers because that means you have a ton of existing customers using your product, but you still want that top layer to be really high because you want to keep growing and keep growing fast, right? And so that's one way. Does that make sense? Yeah. When I explain that to people, like, it's hard without a visualization, but you want to make sure that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I'm picturing, like, an area chart where it's just, like, multicolored. I don't know how many segments you'd have kind of up and to the right, but I can picture it, and I don't work in finance, so I'm guessing somebody else that does, who's listening, will be just fine kind of visualizing it. And we can throw in I'll put something in, like, the show notes with, like, a graphic if we can steal something from Mosaic and maybe give people a visual.
For sure. And it's funny, I actually thought about, like, the layer cake, and I threw on a timer and tried to see how long it would take me to build a layer cake in Mosaic, right? And this is kind of a free Mosaic plug, I guess. But it took me 40 seconds to build a layer cake in the way that I wanted to see it. And that means I'm probably losing a step in the app. I'm sure my CSMs could do it in 25 seconds. But it was cool to kind of see it, the visuals with the colors and what have you. But yeah, that's a super, super powerful way. I think the other way too, where we spend a lot more time cohorting at a deeper level, is what we call, like, time-based. And that's really to understand, like, your behavior, like a behavior of something over time, sure. Right? And so, it's the classic, you look this up, you'll see, like, the classic waterfalls where along the top it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then along like the y-axis is some sort of segmentation that you're doing, and net dollar retention over time, lifetime value over time. And so it's really meant as a way to analyze some sort of behavior, to find insights and then see what behavior works, what does not work.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, so normally when I've spoken to you about cohort analysis in the past, it's usually in the context of retention because, you're the CS guy, and, like, that's what we talk about. And so it sounds like you can apply it to all kinds of things. Like, I know lifetime value is a retention metric, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, how many customers are retaining period over period. And so if you can apply cohort analysis to so many different metrics with, like, the time-based approach, is there any scenario where it's kind of overkill, like where you're sinking so much time into it when really, like, you're not going to get that much value? Are there times where you shouldn't use cohort analysis?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm very pro cohort, so I like to at least have the option to, investigate the data with that view on it. I think where you could get in trouble is, like, trying to find insights specifically in a cohort, and it just doesn't exist. So you're almost spinning your wheels trying to find something that's just not there. So you have to find the balance between, all right, taking two steps back and what am I trying to solve here? And sometimes cohort is not the answer, but I mean, there's so many, we used to cohort everything at my last company. And even now, I think about, how we leverage cohorts, how I, as a CS leader, leverage cohorts day to day. I mean, I could paint a picture for you. Like I mentioned before, if my team is responsible for net dollar retention, right? I want to know, I want to understand my customer behavior around when renewals happen, when upsells happen, what retention looks like, but then being able to slice that behavior by different segments, right? So I want to see maybe how each CSM is doing, and the behaviors of their customers to maybe the insights on CSMs performing better or worse than others, right? Or I want to, we have different size customers, right? Or different industry customers using different products. So that's when it becomes, really powerful, is getting that time-based cohort, but also layering the segment-based cohorts to really understand and slice and dice your data so many different ways to find insights. So that's more on like the finance side. So that's kind of still like the finance guy in me wanting to do that, as well as, numbers that me and my team are ultimately responsible for. But then there's also like the product aspect of it, right? And that actually becomes very unique when you want to understand specific customer behavior, right? To maybe be proactive about when usage is going south, right? And at what point do our customers, at what point is Mosaic sticky for our customers? Well, we could actually look at, weeks since the customer started onboarding and what their usage looks like, right? And then, have that ability to see, these customers, are getting the most value out of the product, and this is that inflection point when it happened. And okay, well, if we could get a customer to bring on X amount of people to collaborate with, and X amount of users, and have Y amount of time on the platform over first 4 weeks, first 6 weeks, that is like a step to success, right? And so it becomes very powerful when and all you're manipulating really is like that time frame, and sometimes just what the underlying data is that you care about.
Gotcha. Really interesting to hear you kind of take it out of the finance perspective. So, obviously when I come up with these topics, we have a finance audience, so it's really finance focused. And this one in particular, you start looking up articles about it, there's a real mix of like heavy numbers, what do our financials look like, and heavy like product manager audience kind of like trying to figure out when, as you said, when the product is sticky and when it kind of loses that stickiness. So again, like really interesting to hear your perspective, since you kind of straddle the line now between the two sides. I want to get really nuts and bolts for people. I try to make things as actionable as possible when we do these topics. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to like take a step back to your Funbox days and walk me through like a step-by-step of cohort analysis. Like, all right, like it's, we finally closed the books. I want to look back at our numbers, some of the use cases you mentioned, and like what's step one of I'm about to do a cohort analysis. What do I need to do? And I know Mosaic plug, like it's easier in Mosaic. We got it. But for anyone who doesn't use the platform, like what does that look like for them when they have to go end to end?
Yeah. It's a good question. Let me go back into my memory bank, and I tried to put some of this out of my memory when I joined Mosaic, but happy to give some insight here, and even some additional context. Like cohorting was actually like that was the underlying methodology for us to plan the business. Sure. And so without getting into too much information on in detail on what Funbox does, they essentially automated underwriting to give small businesses loans. And so there's a usage component, and there's kind of a recurring component of I'm giving you, Joe, a line of credit of $25K to go use in your small business. You could draw on that line of credit and pay back, right? And so it was, there's a lot of complexity around, well, how often are you drawing? How big is your credit line? How often are you paying back? What does that look like over time? Are you drawing more and more over time, or less and less? Are we giving you more credit increases? Are you stopping to pay? And so, there's a lot to really digest and take in. And so the complexity there was, even before diving into the numbers, we'd have to cohort everything. We have 6, 7, 8 different types of cohorts. So that hopefully paints a picture of how wide this was. And then the actual fundamental of doing it, I mean, you're taking, I'll do the super manual way first, and then we actually upgraded to have like a BI tool and hired a team of 4 people to structure our data, right? And so, but before that, it was taking raw data, I have it in a massive spreadsheet, looking at the key fields, like the key date fields that I care about, right? And so if you're comparing cohorts over time, what is that starting and ending point? Usually the starting point is like, when does a customer first become a customer? Mm-hmm. And then time is kind of relative to every time they drew out a new loan. And so, I'm adding in additional columns and rows to my Excel sheet. I'm doing all these formulas. I'm making sure everything works appropriately. And that's like step one, to like take some sort of data and kind of restructure it so it's usable. And then step two is, all right, now I'm going to have another sheet. Now I actually have to set up what the cohort looks like and how it works, just to get the data into a more cohort-like form.
Yep.
And then step three is it's depending on if you want to take an average, if you want to take a percentage of the initial balance, if you want to take a running sum. I mean, that stuff's not easy to do, even with like pivot tables and power pivots. So then replicating all of what I just did and then doing additional formulas on top of that, right? And so, I mean, it's taking me a couple of minutes just to explain it. You could imagine when you're dealing with large data sets, how frustrating it'll get, because Excel is just not big enough sometimes when we're dealing with big data sets. And we realized something was wrong. So we didn't pull in enough of the data, so now I got to go redo all of that. And that was just to kind of get your starting point. And then the second point was like, all right, well, what's actually going on with these cohorts? It's a new month, it's a new quarter. What's changed? And like our assumptions are driven off of these master cohorts. So we think like we're bucketing half of our potential new users into what we think is going to be their behavior over time. And now we need to dive in to be like, well, is that behavior curve, if you will, is that the most accurate curve? And now if you're tweaking the curve a little bit, the numbers could change dramatically, right? And so it gets a little scary when you're forecasting, but it's also very insightful of, well, hey, marketing team, hey, retention team, this is what we're seeing. If we can move the needle a little bit on behavior, it's actually going to have a massive impact on our customer base, right? And so that's where things become, that's like the fun part of finance, right? It's like you kind of find some of that and actually present it back to the rest of the organization to find actionable insights. But yeah, that stuff takes time, right? And I wish I had more time to do what I described on a monthly basis and update that data monthly and get folks in the loop. The reality is it's painful. It's kind of like, all right, every quarter we're going to refresh this, maybe make changes and what have you. But yeah.
Is that the ideal cadence would be monthly? So now say you put something like Mosaic in place, like you can look at it in real time. Is it still like, I'd imagine you don't want to get bogged down just constantly looking at this data every day. Like you could just drive yourself crazy probably looking at minute changes. Is it just like we close the books and every month we're going to look at this, see where we're at and adjust? Or is there a different cadence that makes more sense?
So I think it depends. I think the monthly cadence is like the natural best cadence for finance, right? Because you want the books to close, you want everything to come in. You're usually doing everything on a monthly basis. Sometimes if you don't have time, it's probably quarterly when you're doing the refreshes. But, other times you actually may want to look at it, maybe not daily, maybe that's overkill, but maybe weekly, right? I mean, at Funbox, customers would repay weekly. And so we would actually leverage cohorts as a way to get the initial insights on, this customer actually just missed a payment, or this cohort is trending pretty bad. What's going on, right? And so we were able to get more proactive by looking at it on a weekly basis. I mean, probably something I'd want to do on the CS side too, of weekly logins and weekly usage across our customers to be as proactive as possible in terms of getting in front of potential issues.
Gotcha. No, all makes total sense. It's kind of the main answer to a lot of the questions I ask on this podcast. Is like, should you do X? And it's like, well, it depends. And like, here's like the 3 different scenarios where it does or does not make sense. And it's always nice to hear guests, people who've done this before for so long, dig into what those nuances are. That's why, honestly, it's the only reason why we have a whole podcast for this, because if everything was so easy, we wouldn't need to talk to anyone about it.
For sure.
I want to get into some of your CS experience, and now they are on that side. Is there anything you're hearing from customers about cohort analysis that maybe is surprising to you? Maybe use cases that you're finding matter the most to people that we are selling to? We sell mostly to VC-backed SaaS companies, like in growth stage? Are there use cases that you're surprised to hear are most important to people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm necessarily surprised, but there's definitely use cases that are more important to the customers we work with. And, we work with a lot of hyper growth companies, right? They've raised a ton of money and now looking to really deploy that cash, right? And so where a lot of them deploying cash is to really, build out a sales function, hire a sales team to bring on more revenue, right? And so, a big thing that comes up is sales rep ramp, right? Especially in the context of planning, in the context of, okay, I want to understand like how fast a new sales rep can start producing revenue and see what that looks like over time. So I know if I hire X amount of sales reps now, here's what the output may be over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, right? And so you can't expect to hire 10 sales reps tomorrow and get full output tomorrow, right? Like there's a whole process. You have to learn the product. You have to follow the playbooks and start building your pipeline, right? And so it's really important for customers, especially when it comes to planning. And if you work backwards, I want to double revenue at the end of the year. Okay, we have 5 salespeople. We know we can't do it with just 5 salespeople. When do I have to start hiring salespeople, right? And based on the production we're expecting them to get over time, well, now I'm just doing math to see, all right, what's the optimal time for me to hire a salesperson, right? And then you could take that a step further. And historically, how long has it taken me from posting a sales job to hiring a salesperson? How long does that take? So now I could almost like cohort upon cohort to say, all right, well, if I need to hire, I need to have 5 new salespeople on the phone in June. All right, I got to talk to my people team because we have to start thinking about hiring now, right?
Right.
And so, that's just a couple ways that cohorts could work in the context of growth. I think even from like a sales pipeline perspective, if we're our marketing team is doing an awesome job of generating new opportunities. Well, how long does it take those opportunities from when like a deal becomes a potential opportunity? How long does it take to actually close, right? Sure. And so now working backwards, how many opportunities do I think I need now because I want to close these deals in 3 months, 6 months? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think to me, it's, again, outside looking into this job, it just seems like my first instinct would be to cohort everything. You mentioned cohorts on cohorts. We just have like cohort inception going on. It's just, it sounds like it can get really tricky to manage. And obviously, just to roll back to where we started with the report, and it was like 14% of people are actually doing this. And that was just for one metric. Like if it's 14% of people can only manage to do it for like net revenue retention, how many are really doing it to the extent that you had to do it at Funbox, or that, our customers, this is what they want to do. Like, it's just really hard. Like, it's like you want to do it and just don't have the time. And so, I know we talked a little bit about challenges, but just to wrap up kind of the idea of you being more customer facing now, are there challenges you've heard from customers outside of the ones that we've mentioned that, maybe are on like a deeper level? Like, is there like I don't know, one that stands out of someone who came in, it's like, I have to do X, Y, and Z, and it's impossible. Like, can Mosaic help?
Yeah, I think there's probably 2. I think the first, probably the bigger challenge is, the cohorting generally places a heavy reliance on historical data, right? Yeah. Especially if you want to trust your historical behavior for a customer, you need to trust your historical data. Otherwise, it's probably not going to help you, right? So it doesn't mean you can't do cohorting, but it means you may have to start fresh, gathering the data in the right structure and the right format, and start feeling confident with it to then maybe reap the benefits 2-3 months later when you actually start getting, that data in a place where you feel good about cohorting it. So that's a big one. And even if you get past that point, I think sometimes, even where I struggled in the past, because I love using cohorts, is how do you actually visualize it in a way where you could explain it to someone who has no idea what a cohort is, what they're looking at, and why it's important, right? And so, when I think of cohorts, I think about it in these massive data tables, but you're not going to share a data table with 100 lines and all these random numbers because, folks are not going to like understand that or digest it. So even things our customers look for now is sometimes they do want to show all the numbers, but having things like heat maps, right? Where you could see, okay, just focus on the green things because that's good. Focus on the red ones, that's bad. Now we'll dive into what those numbers mean, right? Or like putting it in chart form so you could kind of see what the curve looks like over time, and it's pretty evident. You still have to explain what the chart is, but it's evident to see where things break or where there's an inflection point.
Hugely important theme for Mosaic, for all the content we do, for everything we talk about here. We've mentioned it on multiple podcast episodes with people that aren't even from here. So this idea of like finance as a customer service organization, like for the business. And it's funny because like you are the customer success lead for this company. So you epitomize that idea, but that's really what it comes down to when you're like, you need to visualize this in a way that people can actually understand it. I'm wondering if now that you've been on the CS side for as long as you have, is there any like newfound appreciation for CS challenges that maybe like you didn't realize on the finance side if you were on like that side looking into CS when you had to collaborate and you just like couldn't understand why you were up against a certain barrier? Maybe some advice for a finance leader interacting with CS when their CS leader does not have a finance background.
Yeah. I think when you're in finance, you really work for the rest of the organization, right? If you're effective in finance, everyone at the org wants to work with you and they want to get your insights and they trust you with the numbers and they come with you to a problem. They come to you with a problem and they want you to do your magic data and manipulation and calculations to help give them answers. Right, where CS, it's almost like the rest of the organization works for you, right? You're working directly with the customer, so the customer feedback loop and product and engineering and support when there's bugs and working with sales to make sure that we have a nice smooth handoff. And so working with the marketing team, working with the sales team around new content and materials. So there's definitely. It's definitely flipped on the CS side, and I definitely have more of a appreciation for that. And it's there's somebody who started at Mosaic, and they asked me what I did at the organization, and I said customer success, and they were in the engineering org, and they say, well, I'm in customer success too, right? Which is like resonated very well. It's like everyone at the organization is ultimately like doing this for the success of our customers, right? And so our team is kind of the conduit to our customers, but we're kind of relying on everyone in the organization to really make it happen.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna have to ask you offline who the engineer was because I'm gonna have to chat with him or her as well. So
totally.
It's a really unique perspective, and it's true. I mean that is what we're all driving toward. I know we've been going for a little bit. I want to kind of get to our most common question. We ask it for everybody that comes on, and it's zooming out of everything, no cohorts, no, nitty gritty of what you do on a daily basis, but would love to know something that you know now that maybe you wish you knew at the start of your finance and now CS career. Anything at all for advice for people?
It's a good question. I think one thing is assume you know nothing, right? And so what that means is, I came from audit where you have to ask a lot of questions. You have to do so much more listening than talking, and assuming you know nothing, and sometimes asking the basic questions actually become very powerful to fundamentally understand the concepts, and then you could actually dig in and learn more and ask better questions. So really trying to simplify things, processes, numbers, behavior. A lot of the stuff we talked about, like, try to put it in its simplest form and ask some basic questions to get a lot of context and just to make sure you understand the fundamentals of it is going to go such a long way into, learning as much as you can about it and actually just slowly becoming smarter in that space.
Yeah, it's that really resonates with me. I love this question mostly because it always ends up applying to much more than just finance. So you ask a finance leader for advice, like what they wish they knew. And it's never like, I wish I knew more about building cohort tables like in Excel. It's always something that zooms out a little bit for like the longevity of, can't speak, of their career. And, you know, for me, like just doing this podcast, just getting to learn from people like you and the other guests on the podcast, just coming in and being curious about what you all do on a daily basis. So couldn't agree more with the idea of just assuming you know nothing and going in and trying to learn as much as you can. I think it's super important. I think everyone will appreciate that.
Totally. And that's one of the, I mean, honestly, it's one of the cool things about being in CS now is, you know, we're talking to customers every day, different size customers, different personas, like one day talking to a co-founder or a CFO, the next day talking to, you know, a FP&A analyst. And so, you know, you're just asking questions. And, you know, they always tell my team like context, and just start getting all these dots and trying to connect them, because it's gonna help you, and it's gonna make it easier for you to help the customers when you know what they care about, right? Yeah. And so that's one of the coolest things is, you know, half of our job is just asking questions and listening, right? Yeah. And then trying to figure out where we can help based on what we hear.
Love it. It's a great way to kind of wrap up here, because I know we're at time. Normally I give people a spotlight to say like what company they're from and what they do, but like go to mosaic.tech and learn about what we do. But I'll open it up to you. Just where can people go to connect with you, learn more about all the work you're doing here, maybe reach out about, you know, working with you as a potential customer?
Yeah, totally. I mean, LinkedIn for sure. You know, if you have any connection to Mosaic, it's pretty easy to get a hold of me. I think there's the running joke. I think most of my customers probably have my phone number, so you could probably get that if you dig hard enough. But
yeah, let's not throw that out on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't need to be giving that out.
For sure. But yeah, I'm accessible for sure.
Cool. Well, Steve, thanks so much for joining. Really great to learn from you, hear more about your background, and all the insight about cohort analysis is really great. So just appreciate you spending time with us, and it's great having you on the Roll Forward.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Joe.
All right, see you, Steve.
See ya.
Thank you for checking out this episode of The Roll Forward. This show is powered by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow The Roll Forward wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit mosaic.tech/podcast to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.